The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Urjanet's webinar, The New Consumers of Energy Data. We're thrilled to have a fantastic panel for our session today to discuss the importance of acquiring timely, high-quality energy data and how multiple departments throughout your organization can use this data to make informed decisions. I'd also like to thank our regular webinar attendees. If you've joined us before, welcome back. And for our new listeners, we're glad to have you with us too. My name is Eric Becker, and I'll be moderating the event today. And joining me is Kevin Sock with Cox Enterprises, Brian Glazebrook with NetApp, Jason Roeder with Powerhouse Dynamics, and we're delighted to welcome back Alisdair McDougall with Verdantix, who has participated in past webinars with us. And Alisdair, you're back by popular demand. You're a favorite among our attendees, so we're certainly glad to have you again. I'm very excited about the session today. This should be useful to anyone involved in energy management, procurement, or sustainability initiatives. Alisdair will lead off the agenda today. He'll be talking about his research in the area in the world of energy management and how users throughout the organization can benefit from access to energy data. We'll then hear from our panelists at Cox, NetApp, and Powerhouse Dynamics. And finally, we'll get into our Q&A. In today's session, we'll have a minimal number of slides, so we'd really like for this to be as interactive as possible. To those of you who submitted questions for our panelists, thanks for your input. Listen closely to see if your questions get answered. But also, it's not too late for others that want to submit questions. You can submit them at any point during today's session, and we'll do our best to answer them. Also, following our session today, we'll send each of you a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar. We'll also have this session transcribed and available next week for download as part of our expert Q&A series. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alisdair.
Great, thanks, Eric. And as Eric mentioned, I'll be kicking off today's presentation and looking at running through some of the information and analysis that I do here at Verdantix. And I'm just waiting for control slides. Here we go. But today I'll try and keep my section as quick as possible with such good panelists on today. I think the real richness will come in hearing what they have to say, and especially the Q&A section. But for those of you that have not listened into either Verdantix or Urjanet webinars before, my name is Alisdair McDougall, and I'm an industry analyst at Verdantix. I sit within our energy practice out of our London office, and we're an independent analyst firm looking at energy, environment, and sustainability. Specifically, I look at research on energy management software and industrial technologies to help corporates reduce and manage their energy consumption. Today, I'm going to be running through two main themes. So first of all, how energy management is becoming a strategic business objective, and then looking into who within an organization can benefit from access to energy data. So for those of you that listened into the last Urjanet webinar, you'd have heard me talking about there being four main drivers for firms investing in energy management. And these are economics, customers, sustainability, and legislation. And each of these drivers are very important in their own right. And will generally have individuals tasked with looking at how to best optimize these and ensure that the company's performing how it should do. But where energy management starts becoming a strategic objective and becomes a little bit more complicated is once firms actually start thinking about these drivers instead of being single or discrete drivers, and actually thinking about how they are all linked together and how each one can have an impact on the other. And again, as I mentioned, those drivers may have individual teams or business units all looking at them individually, but once you start bringing them together in a strategic energy management scenario, you need to be able to take those teams and put those teams together and integrate those teams and share information amongst them. And again, another area that makes this slightly more complicated is the fact that there's no one-size-fits-all solution here. How customers are impacted or view energy and sustainability information in one sector will be completely different to how they do so in another sector. And we've seen this translating into energy management strategies becoming far more strategic, a term I've used already. And what we see generally happening within that is firms elevating energy management to more of a centralized decision-making and sometimes even global energy management strategy. And here at Verdantix, we interview 250 energy leaders every year to get their opinions across a number of energy management topics. And we can see here for 2 years in a row, we ask firms in terms of what their governance structure looks like. And you see the big change here is firms taking decisions from a divisional or national level and really promoting them up to more of a global and especially centralized decision-making authority. Again, as I mentioned on the previous slide, how this varies by industry, it's always important to remember that. And it's why we don't see much movement when we look at the delegation of energy management to local managers. For some industries, particularly those very energy intensive industries such as basic resources or chemicals, where energy is consumed on a smaller number of sites in a very intensive way. And our research has found that in those organizations, it's sometimes better to keep energy management at a local level. So one thing we do see that's not different across energy management strategies, whether they're done at the global level or at the local level, is the importance of data. And we see data as a starting point and foundation for all successful energy management strategies. And this diagram on the slide here is just an example of how a strategy could develop from its early stages through to energy management strategies that transforming business operations and looking at both supply and demand side energy management. And you see here in the bottom left-hand side, collecting and centralizing energy data is this sort of starting block. And it is increased in importance once you move up towards a global strategy, because obviously having the one source of data definitely improves the effectiveness of those strategies. And this is, again, why we're seeing energy management increasingly becoming data-driven. Firms have realized that it really is underpinning all successful energy management strategies. And we see energy data in terms of its size going from small and patchy data sets to large global data sets, the frequency at which it's captured moving from potentially monthly or quarterly bill analysis to almost near real time in instances. The governance level, again, shown by our survey results, moving away from being departmental towards being enterprise and cross-departments. Data technology investment, moving away from only focusing on a select number of sites to looking at integrating technology across your portfolio, again, bringing everything centralized into one area for you to view and manage. And the organizational requirements, moving away from data aggregation and consolidation. A number of those firms which have already sort of ticked that box and got their house in order are starting to really use that data and making it available to teams for portfolio and strategic risk management. So now I've talked a little bit around sort of why or how energy management is becoming more of a strategic objective and the role that data plays within that. I'm going to run through who within an organization could benefit from access to energy data. And this is just very much examples. I mean, again, I've talked a few times about how every organization is different and it can vary by organization. But going back to that global survey which we conducted, we spoke to the most senior person responsible for energy within an organization. And what might surprise you is the fact that only 37% of those respondents actually had the term energy in their job title. And what we find really interesting about that is the fact that managing energy as a strategic priority or as an objective is a relatively new concept, apart from in certain industries. And that's how we've seen that there's not so many people that have it with a designated job title. In most instances, it's been tapped onto the person who's most likely to have the highest level of interest. And we saw other respondents having titles such as Head of Property, Facilities Director, Operations Director, the CSR Manager, or the Chief Engineer. And what this really shows to us is the fact that this is evidence that energy data is important to a wide array of roles. The initial thought might be it's the head of energy, but if you don't have a head of energy, then someone's responsible for it. And if the CSR manager at one of your competitors is taking an interest in energy management, you may need to ask why your CSR manager is not taking interest in energy management. The same with a property director. And that's one of the things that we see here, really coming out of this data, is this is proof that just looking at how different organizations have tapped energy management onto different roles shows that there is an applicability of that information across a number of different areas within organizations. And this is some more data which we captured when we were benchmarking some of the leading suppliers of energy management software. We spoke to a number of customers of those solutions, and these are the people responsible for buying or procuring energy management software, mainly for access of data. We asked them how useful it would be for a number of user groups to have greater access to energy data. Obviously, we see energy teams coming out here as the top one, probably quite good at in taking into account it's for energy management as its primary resource. But the other interesting thing here we see is across the board, a large number of respondents felt it would be useful for a number of different groups, ranging from energy teams right down into external stakeholders, so customers and investors, to have greater access to energy data. That doesn't necessarily mean they're all going to be building strategies or massive decisions. In terms of investors, it can just be that insight into another aspect in terms of what they're interested or how they're assessing your business in terms of how good it is for investment or how happy they are to keep their custom with you. And one of the reasons we see this aspect of greater access being applicable across a broad range of different user groups is the fact that energy data aids with multiple strategic and tactical business objectives within organizations. And by tactical, what we normally refer to is sort of the day-to-day operations of an organization, so really benefiting people in their day-to-day business duties, whereas strategics is a little bit more forward-looking, developing into strategies, looking at risk, and really optimization of business performance going forward in the long run. And tactical, we've seen an increasing number of facilities teams looking at using energy to minimize costs and improve asset efficiency. Obviously, CSR and sustainability teams looking at complying with legislation or streamlining reporting processes. EH&S, again, an important part in achieving certification or reporting. Procurement into reducing energy costs from a supply perspective. When you get into the strategic initiatives, you see areas such as the CFO taking an interest in terms of looking at financial risks, especially if you operate in areas where energy prices are far from stable. Again, the CSO looking to benchmark performance against peers, look to pioneer and innovate within an organization to try and harvest some of those brand benefits that can come. And then even up to the CEO looking at efficiency business planning and how the entire organization is working. And really, energy can lead all the way to the top because sometimes I use the analogy, it's like the blood of a firm. It makes everything else tick. Therefore, the CEO having a view is really being able to span his entire or her entire operations. And some people may think it's a bit drastic thinking about the CEO or the CSO having an interest in this level of information, but actually, when we were discussing the content of this webinar, it was brought to my attention the Unilever corporate executives having their remuneration actually tied into sustainability performance. And again, if there's one way to get these senior individuals looking at energy and using energy data, it's definitely to tie it into how much they go home with at the end of the month. And one of the really sort of important and good things about if you have an energy data and energy management strategy in place is the fact that you can start sharing this data and information both vertically and horizontally throughout your organization. And we find this increasing in importance as when we're speaking to corporates, the number of different teams looking to use energy data, or at least having access to energy data, is increasing. And gone should be the days where you have individual teams going out and investing in siloed little packages and not knowing that, oh, hang on a minute, procurement actually have a lot of this information already. You should look to develop a strategy and promote it within your organization that, guys, we have this information, we have the data, you should be looking at it for this reason, and giving people the opportunity to have access to it and start looking for ways in terms of how it can benefit their day-to-day job or day-to-day decisions, because ultimately those lead to benefits to the organization overall. And again, I mentioned briefly earlier on how energy data can be of interest to external sources. And again, this is just the sort of hierarchy that we sometimes share with people, and it shows sort of the three main functions which can benefit from energy data in terms of finance, EH&S and sustainability, and then operations, and some of the internal users, but then also external users. So I've spoken a little bit already about external stakeholders, so investors, shareholders, customers. But we've even heard of interesting examples of firms reducing their sustainability assurance costs by being able to provide their assurance provider with a direct access into the software platform. You can get a full data audit trail, you can see how much data is estimated, what rules have been used to estimate that, and that really makes everybody's life easier from an internal perspective, but also that of the assurance provider, and that will generally translate into lower costs. So again, it's a sort of story of everybody winning all round, really. Another example would be sharing that data with, if you have an outsourced facilities team, providing them access of that information. One, as a way of allowing them to find more opportunities, but two, as a way for you just to make sure that they are really doing what they should be doing and ensuring they're harvesting energy benefits for your organization. And again, when I started talking about this, I really want to try and explain that these are just examples of where energy data can be used. I mean, I really like energy data, so I try to find all sorts of potential usage scenarios for it. But on this slide, there's some examples here where people have used it maybe thinking outside of the box a little bit. So I've spoken with a large North American retailer that actually used their energy data to manage its entire portfolio of stores during Hurricane Sandy. There's one way to tell if a store has been hit by a hurricane, that's to see if it's using any energy consumption. And they were able to then put in place a recovery strategy and get generators out efficiently and maintenance teams. We've seen European grocery retailers engage employees on energy management best practices through the use of alarms, continuous engagement with their employees to reduce energy consumption. A high street retailer doing a cost-benefit analysis of leaving shop doors open, and when that doesn't make sense from a financial point of view. In the past, they may have just threw the doors open, let the HVAC run at twice its pace, and actually not sold much more. This would mean it's actually a bad business decision. A global technology firm managing to cut its energy and maintenance costs by providing facilities teams with greater access to data. A casino looking to optimize energy costs and comfort levels by actually looking at normalizing that information and taking into account how many people were in the casino at different times and where they were within, and using that to drive the HVAC system rather than having defined set points. And then a quite random example of a cold food storage firm reducing its energy bill by increasing its energy consumption. And what they realized here is by looking at when they were using energy, they found out they were really getting penalized for their peak load. So they actually changed their operations, and although the actual amount of energy they used increased, their energy bill reduced significantly. And that's another sort of counterintuitive example of where energy data brings value, which you can't really get unless you have all the data laid out in front of you and a clear view of how your organization uses energy and when it uses energy. So that's all from me, and I'll pass you back over to Eric.
Okay, thank you. That was great, Alisdair. So what did we learn from Alisdair's presentation? Well, first of all, there's a diverse group of people who are responsible for energy management, and energy data aids with both strategic and tactical business objectives. And finally, we learned that both internal users and external stakeholders benefit from these insights. So that was, again, thanks. That was great, Alisdair. And now I'm going to turn it over to our next panelist, Kevin Sock from Cox Enterprises. So, Kevin, why don't you tell the audience a bit about yourself?
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Alisdair, for that great presentation. It's a good flow into what we're doing at Cox in terms of data management and how we're able to reap the benefits of knowing where the data comes from and what we do with them. Again, part of my job at Cox Enterprises is to look at alternative energy, but also, more importantly, is to consolidate and centralize all the various data sources that we have across our multiple business units across the U.S. and some international as well. So right now, as part of my job is to figure out all the locations and all the data source owners and how we can make an impact of managing the energy as efficiently as possible. So just as before the presentation, let me give you a little brief intro to Cox Enterprises for some of you who don't know what we do and who we are. Our revenues nearly $16 billion a year, and we have approximately 50,000 employees. And some of you may have our high-speed internet and cable systems as part of the Cox Communications, and also some of you may have our televisions and radio and newspapers as part of Cox Media Group. Then also some of you may be buying cars and also using our Kelley Blue Books. That's some of the business that we own under Cox Automotive Group as well. And we have a Manheim division, which is an auto dealers where all the dealers can go and get their cars and bring to their dealerships, and that's under Cox Automotive business. So with all those business units, with all those different type of business as well, we came up with a sustainability goals, and our company has a really aggressive goals in how we pursue carbon neutral. And our goal is to be carbon neutral by 2043 and also water neutral by 2043 as well. So about 30 years from now, hopefully I'll be retired by then. But it's very aggressive, and we're trying to be as innovative as we can and how we benchmark and how we pursue those goals and how we track progress or anything else. And in addition to those goals, we have zero waste to landfill, and that's at a shorter time span by 2023. Just a little bit about the type and kinds of data that we deal with at Cox. We have over 40,000 plus accounts in terms of the gas accounts, electricity, water, fuel, and other accounts. And that's a huge amount of accounts that we have to deal with. And there's no way that we can handle that manually or using interns or anybody else that can help us with that. And also, in addition to that, we have over 56,000 different type of assets that we try to analyze, try to correlate how we use energy and how we can reduce the energy. And we have over, those accounts, we operate over 41 states and some international locations as part of those business units I mentioned earlier. And we spend over $150 million annually. And hopefully with knowing the data that we have, we can manage that as efficiently as possible. So how do we approach our data? And we, at Cox, we have our own philosophy, and I'm sure all of you will see this as applicable to anybody else. We try to we know data is important, and we try to derive that and use that to help us with our decision process. And because for the longest time we've been trying to capture, been trying to store and analyze a vast amount of data, it's helpful to have Urjanet to help us with those data. In addition to that, not just capturing the data, we got to make sure that we have governance in place and the process in place to ensure that those data are accurate. The data is not as useful, or it's not useful at all if they're not accurate. So on the upstream, we have to make sure that we have governance in place and the process to ensure that those data are complete and even auditable, because we want to go back and look at the trends, look at the post-analysis or pre-analysis of anything that we do. And like I mentioned earlier, we look at all these data and try to make some sense of how we use that to help with our core businesses or our operations. And it's very important that we have some way of managing the data as efficiently as possible, like what I mentioned earlier. So how do we use data? I mean, if we have all these data that in our platform, how do we make sense of all these things? And here's some of the things that we try to do, and you guys can use this as some ways of approaching your business as well too, because this is not anything rocket science, but I think it's helpful in how you approach your energy and your energy costs. What we do with the data, like most of us do, we track consumptions, and we look at how much we spend on that comparing to what our budgets are. Another one we try to do is we look at anomalies, and a lot of times there are billing errors out there, and there's also there's different trends depending on who's running the buildings or running the sites. And if we have the data, we can trend that and look at that and make some corrections, ensure that the next month or the following month or the last 12 months, it's not having those anomalies. And also to get the refund that you should get back if there's an error with the utilities. And also the other thing too is that if you have all this data, and you can actually use that to help you negotiate better rates. And if it changes too, you can go back and maybe you need to change your rate tariffs to make sure you're not on the wrong rates, and that could cost you money. And that's not very hard to do if you know your load profile, and you know if you are on a certain rate that's not appropriate. And also too, what we do is that we look at the rate structure, we look at the utility costs to help us with where we should do our energy conservations or our alternate energy. And what we do is that we try to look at where the highest costs are. And with the data that we have, we can profile the entire United States or anywhere else and look at where are we paying the highest costs, how should we approach in terms of displacing those big costs with energy conservation, with distributed generation, such as solar or wind or fuel cell or any of those things. Here is a snapshot of how we use, because we've been using Urjanet to help us with the data capturing, the data scraping from different utilities. We need to have, with a good back end, you need to have a good front end. And what we want to do too is we want to make sure that we have a way to approach the data as user-friendly as possible. And to do that, what we do is we try to centralize the data, and also get that to a point where any one of us or anyone at Cox, any of the energy managers from different sites, different businesses can look at the dashboard, look at the profile, and help them make their decisions. This is just a snapshot of how we approach that. Here is an example of how we, after we acquire all this data, and we're capturing them, we're storing them, and this is part of the analysis that we do. As you can see here, that we can look at month to month, we can look at the consumption value, the year, And we can also look at different metrics in terms of cost per kilowatt hours or therms or any of those things to help us make a decision or go back and figure out if we need to modify our loads or change the rates or install solar panels on top of the roofs, whatever it is, to make sure that we're efficiently reducing our costs and not increasing them because of all the different changes. And, because we have this data in a centralized location, we can actually use that to help us with a carbon footprint analysis. And this is just an illustration of how granular it can be by having the different accounts and different location and different year and different sites. We can come up with a sort of a template of how we track, manage our carbon footprint. Well, that's it for me. Eric?
Yeah, no, that was great, Kevin. Really appreciate that. And now let's hear from Brian with NetApp.
Great, thank you. Thanks for everybody for listening in and attending, and thanks to Urjanet for the opportunity to talk. A little bit about me. NetApp is a global company dealing with data storage and management tools and software. And I've been at NetApp for 2 years, running as the senior global sustainability manager, managing a variety of different issues, including energy and other sustainability metrics for operations and facilities across the world. I've been doing this for quite a while, and it's this opportunity at NetApp, and especially all the things now as technology is growing and the things we can do with data and with Urjanet as well, as I'll talk about, have really made my job very interesting, even after doing this for such a long time. So. Next slide. There we go. So a little bit more about NetApp. Most of you probably have no idea who NetApp is, and that's understandable. We're a Fortune 500 B2B company with about 13,000 employees around the world and in 150 countries. We have been rated as on the 100 best companies to work for the past 12 years. And that's been sort of part of the overall culture at NetApp that's been pretty important, and also been very helpful to me. That culture has been very helpful to me in trying to get some of these activities done. Some examples of the things that we do. For example, many of you know about the Curiosity rover. NASA JPL uses NetApp storage to handle the data flow from Mars. Handling it's about 125 megabytes of data streamed a day, and using our tools to sort of manage that data and figure out what they're learning and what's being pulled in from Mars. In addition, the Large Hadron Collider, which is at CERN in Switzerland, uses our storage and software to manage the data that they get when they run the Large Hadron Collider. And when they run the collider, they collect data in about a million gigabytes a second, and so they need a large and functional storage to be able to manage and analyze all of that data. And so, in the line of this and what we do around data, it also relates to how we look at energy and sustainability management. Data is a big part of that. So, next slide, please. So for NetApp and on sustainability, the thing that has been great for me since I've been here is that, as I mentioned, the culture as being a great place to work has also been a culture of people who are interested in innovating and trying and doing new things. And one thing I found when I came here is NetApp's always focused on energy as an example in facility design and operations. So for example, in 2009, our Global Dynamic Lab, which is an internal lab that we use, a data center essentially, in RTP, North Carolina, was the first data center to receive the US EPA's Energy Star rating. For those of you familiar with data centers and how they're evaluated, there's a factor called PUE, which is power usage effectiveness, and it's really a ratio of the total energy for the building or for the data center or lab space divided by the energy used by the IT equipment. So the closer you get to the number one, the more efficient you are. On average, data centers run about 2 as a factor for their PUE rating. This data center opened, I think it was 1 0.19, 1.2 as it operates. So when we have a variety of different ways that we manage that energy. So getting people to get on board with sustainability and looking at things like reclaimed water in our operations here in California, for example, it's not a challenge. But the challenge is really responding to the requests we get externally for information, and that's kind of how we came to Urjanet. Customers and investors, as many of you will know, are starting to ask for a lot more information, and not just on energy, but other metrics such as waste generated and water use and air travel and other things. And we report to the Carbon Disclosure CDP annually for the investor report, and that requires a lot of data and a lot of metrics and so forth to be generated from all this information that we collect. Spreadsheets were getting unwieldy and making it very difficult to manage this information. So we, after a process, implemented a SaaS platform called Envizi that has allowed us to collect all of this data, this growing volume of data in whatever flavor we have, and then manage that and sort of analyze it and look at the information. So next slide, please. Thanks. So with the tool, it's been great to be able to analyze the information and look at things, but the challenge has always been data. You can only analyze what information you have, and having good data is important. I roll up into the finance organization, and as you can imagine, the CFO doesn't want us to be making decisions on bad data, and so that is something that's been important to us. So we have, as a company, if we focus on energy here, since everyone's talking about that, and we have about 4 million square feet of office space globally. Not all that's owned, but of that, about 200 plus data centers and labs throughout these different locations. But those labs and data centers consume almost 2/3 of our total annual kilowatt hours that we consume or annually, and we spend money for. It's a significant operational expenditure. It's a significant an opportunity for us to reduce expenses, and it's much better to reduce energy expense than cut back on certain projects or have other things that we have to do if we can do it. So part of the ability, part of getting to the point of deciding what you can do to manage that data is collecting it and putting it and analyzing in a way that makes sense. So of all those, 4,000 square feet, 150 locations, additional labs, it's not 40,000 accounts, but it's a significant amount of information. And so through the tool we work with, Envizi, we were able to do a pilot with Urjanet. And the key part was the ability to have data being pulled directly out of our utilities from their portal interface or from PDFs of the bill, have it be parsed into a standard format template for this data, this billing data, and have it be pumped automatically into our tool. So for the utility data, we use it to pull the detailed invoice data to track all sorts of costs and peak, off-peak, kilowatt-hour consumption, et cetera. And we're starting to use that to look at allocating costs to specific users, and also we could use sort of the peak, off-peak, and the time of use information if we have it from different bills to determine if we can make adjustments to, say, if we have things operating in a lab that are running during peak times, that we could adjust it maybe to operate and run at the nighttime where the rates are a little bit lower, and adjust and manage our costs that way. In addition, we have this meter data that's being pulled in from select utilities that we're going to use to be able to create a shadow bill, if you will, and compare the bills that we get from our utilities on a monthly basis to what we're actually consuming. We can do that now with spreadsheets and some other things, but it's very time consuming, and the value you get out of it is limited. The benefit of working with this Urjanet and their template and pulling in of data is we're able to get this stuff real time. When it comes out from the utility, we're able to track all these different sources of information and start to analyze them in our tool more quickly with this online feed. And we can spend more time focusing on analyzing the information and trying to identify opportunities for improvement rather than collecting. So that's it. That's our perspective, and thanks for the time to talk.
Yeah, that was terrific, Brian. Really appreciate that. So we've heard from both Brian and Kevin from a large organization perspective, talking about the need for energy data. And now we're going to hear from Jason Roeder of Powerhouse Dynamics to learn how their solution is allowing facilities managers to improve operations. So, Jason?
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody for listening in and the opportunity to be here. As noted, Powerhouse Dynamics is a technology and services provider to energy-consuming organizations. We're a company based in Massachusetts and provide hardware, software, and services. And we're a little different in that way, and also we focus on big energy users, but big in a different sense. We target organizations that have a large number of smaller facilities. So, for example, retail chains or convenience stores or restaurants. We spend a lot of time with them. And one of the things that we do is help bring down the energy management and facilities management techniques to a very tactical level, and we do that through providing and collecting very granular data. So a lot of our customers, as echoes Alisdair's comments and others, have been using data increasingly at a strategic level, but we help them at a tactical level by collecting energy and related data at really a minute-by-minute basis, and also on an equipment-by-equipment basis. So our systems collect that information, we analyze it in the cloud, and it helps our customers manage their equipment utilization and identify equipment performance problems before they become true emergencies. Next slide. So let me give you a couple of examples of what that looks like. So for example, your facilities team is tasked with helping to maintain the HVAC equipment. This is very common. You know, across some of our portfolios, we're talking about thousands of individual rooftop units that need to be managed across the country or internationally. And what we help them do is use energy data that is collected on a minute-by-minute level. So this chart right here is looking at a given HVAC unit every minute for a period of 1 day, and it is able to detect problems. In this case, the problem detected is a failing condenser fan, which is not causing the unit to fail entirely, but will ultimately cause the unit to degrade and may be compromising the comfort of whomever is inside that space. And that energy data enables us to detect that. So this is an example of energy data extending into a new way and helping an organization manage a business problem. In this chart, you'll see that the red area pattern looks different than the green area, and that's because the problem was solved. The technician was able to go out and replace this fan. Next slide, please. Similar example, but slightly different. In this case, we're integrating temperature data, and we're looking at the same type of chart, a 24-hour chart with energy and temperature data for a walk-in cooler that's storing food. So food safety is a key component of this situation. And what's happened here is we have an elevated temperature inside that red oval that's indicating an unsafe temperature for storing food overnight. That temperature was detected, action was taken, and you can see the red line going back down towards 40 degrees, which is a safe zone. And this instance was detected by the energy data, also by the temperature data, and it turns out that in this case, the driver who delivered food to this restaurant overnight simply propped open the door and forgot to close it entirely. And there's the little text on the side is a note from that company in response to this data saying, oops, I'm very sorry about that. We won't do it again. So it reminds me of Alisdair's commentary about different organizations finding new and creative ways to use energy data to make themselves more efficient and reach out to external stakeholders, in this case a delivery vendor, to hold them accountable for quality service. Next slide, please. One last example here relates to an operational best practice. So a lot of the organizations we work with operate on very thin margins, and every bit of cost that they can more effectively control is very important to them. This can be brought to life and realized through using energy data. So in this case, this is a piece of equipment that is an electronically heated table for different types of foods or soups, and this uses a lot of energy. It's electrical heating, and it's heating water basically, and this is run for many hours of the day and costs a few $1,000s a year to operate. And as a chain operator, you may have hundreds or thousands of these units across your locations. So being able to understand just how much it costs to operate this unit And then also understanding that if we train our operators to more effectively consolidate the use of this piece of equipment, and inside that red oval you'll see some little dots, that this piece of equipment has different zones, and all of those zones are not needed all day. But this is a discovery that energy data has helped bring to their mind, and there's actually a significant savings potential in being able to better manage how each of those zones is used. So this is an example of something that maybe has been in practice at larger buildings over a longer period of time, but we're now bringing this down to the much smaller footprint and right down to the individual piece of equipment, an individual dial, essentially, to help them take something that was formerly uncontrollable and make it controllable. Last slide, please. So I'm moving quickly because I know we're trying to save time for questions, but hopefully that gives you a flavor for how we are seeing granular energy data being able to drive operational efficiencies and operational continuity in really new ways, and even for a new type of customer. That's what we do with our product. Our product is called SiteSage. This is a little schematic of the hardware and cloud-based software that we use to deliver that, and we're having a lot of fun with it, and it's very, very fascinating.
That was great. Thank you, Jason. That was an excellent presentation. I know we've got some questions that have queued up for you that we'll get to in just a moment. And yeah, we do have some great questions we want to try to get to. So we're going to leave the webinar open for about 10 or 15 minutes after the top of the hour just to get to as many of these questions as we can. So keep them coming in. But before we get started, I want to take just a brief moment to tell you a bit about Urjanet. Urjanet's the world's first provider of big energy data as a service. Our mission is really just to deliver the world the big energy data that they need to make smarter, more profitable, and eco-friendly energy decisions. We are a data-only company, so we don't provide software applications or offer any kind of analytic capabilities. We don't provide any energy management services. We just focus on one thing, and that is the difficult problem of providing our customers with a reliable stream of energy data. And our data brings value across the organization, and it does this through a platform that connects to thousands of different energy sources, including nearly 1,000 different utility providers in North America. And then we feed this data in near real time directly into our customers' applications for accounting, procurement, facilities and energy management, and sustainability reporting. Our solutions consist of 4 unique data subscription services. Urjanet Utility Data, as you can probably gather, is a data feed that consists of all the data that you can capture from a utility bill. Sometimes that's as much as 125 different data elements, and also the bill image itself. Urjanet Meter Data is a data stream that provides our customers with access to interval or smart meter data, also information that we source from the utility provider systems. Urjanet Weather Data, which is weather information from 4,000 certified weather stations. And then finally, Urjanet Alerts, which is a data service that provides our customers with notifications about potential billing or usage anomalies. And finally, I wanted to remind our attendees about Urjanet's upcoming conference, Spark 2014. This will take place in Atlanta, October 8th through 9th. There's a bunch of additional information about this on our website, so I encourage you to look that up. So that's a bit about what we do in our upcoming conference. Now let's get started with the Q&A. Let's see, the first one, Kevin, is directed at you, and that is, what types of tools and processes can an organization use to seamlessly and efficiently collect energy data?
Well, from our perspective, we've tried it all. We've tried manual, we've tried looking at different processes, but not to try to promote Urjanet too much, but their technology has been help us tremendously in terms of how we manage or how we evaluate our data. Just because in our situation, we have, as you've seen in my previous slide, it's the fact that we have over 40,000 plus data accounts and all those things. So it's a large amount of data. So we have to have some way of being automated, some way that directly download from the specific sources to help us do that.
Okay, that's good. And then in the area of data collection, Jason, a question for you. and that is the questioner asks, our biggest hurdle is not with sharing the data, but with collecting it. Do you have tips for getting cooperation from utility companies or cost-effective whole building utility monitoring equipment?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good one. Getting cooperation from utilities can be tough from time to time, but services like Urjanet and also initiatives like Green Button are making that easier over time, but it can be a real slog. In addition to the build data, which we talked about, the interval data that you would get from whole building monitoring equipment it's fairly readily available. Many vendors can provide that to you through the cloud at a fairly reasonable price now. We monitor that kind of data with our system as well. And a benefit there is you do get the interval data, which enables you to understand your peak loads and your demand charges, and gives you a lot of richness that you can then go forth with and not only do wide-scale benchmarking on the consumption data, but also think about those usage patterns. So nothing comes straight to mind, but there are an increasingly number of cost-effective tools out there to, I think, achieve either of these goals.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jason. And then this question was directed at Urjanet, so I'll take a crack at answering it. And the question is, how do I know if the utility data is good? What are the data quality elements that provide assurance that the data is both actionable and audit ready? And we talked a bit about this, but I will tell you that data quality is a problem, especially in this space, because as most of you can probably appreciate, there are no standards for the way that energy data is shared. So a bill that comes from a utility company is complicated in and of itself. And then when they're coming from all different utility providers and all different formats, and you multiply that by the volume of data that a lot of customers are trying to sort through, it becomes a problem, and quality in particular becomes a problem. So what we try to do about that is use technology on our platform to help solve the quality problem. So we have a bunch of computerized audits that runs against this volume of data to ensure that it's accurate. We think that's really the only way at scale to ensure that our customers end up with quality data that they can use. Brian, a question for you. It seems as though there could be an opportunity to minimize discrepancies associated with disparate data sets and entry platforms. What are your best practices?
Well, there's a number of things you can do to manage that. For us, it's the first thing is to set up some sort of data management process or protocol to know where stuff is coming in and how you're collecting it. Part of the challenge is not only where it comes from, but what source it is and how it gets through multiple steps. The next I think opportunity is to automate as much as possible and get as close to the original source of data as you can. And again, this is one of the reasons why we're working with Urjanet, is that the ability to pull directly from the utility versus having to go in for us to go into the utility, pull the data down, copy and transcribe it over where there could be problems and issues and that sort. And the last is sort of having an agreed upon, I think, internal source of truth for energy data, so that when you're looking at it, if people go and they want to get information on energy, that they go to the right source. And there aren't like multiple locations where you can pull energy, utility data, what have you, around the world.
Okay, great. I think that's helpful, Brian. And then Alisdair, a question that has been posed to you. What type of graphical energy benchmarking reports are currently available so I can determine where responsible energy improvements can be made and for which locations?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it's actually where one of the areas I analyze energy management software really comes into play. So applications that allow you to take this information, analyze it, and then take actions. And in terms of the different types of reports, we see there being a large number. So at the portfolio level, you can have reports where you plot all of your sites on a map, and you can see it with green or red or amber pins. You can do top, bottom, sort of 10 performing site analysis. At the site level, you can look into more so alarms. So every time you log in, you see a report of where action could be necessary. At the project level, you could see analysis in terms of being able to log in and see where others have implemented different projects, what results they've achieved, their ROIs, etc. even looking at reports which also overlay carbon reduction data on top of that, so you can view it from a sustainability perspective as well as a financial. And really, the best thing about having access to all of this data and the solutions that are coming on the market, like that offered by Powerhouse Dynamics or Envisi, another firm mentioned in today's webinar, is the fact that they're very configurable and allow you to really take control of that data and do as you wish with it to get to the sort of end goals that you're hoping to achieve.
Okay, and then this may be somewhat related, Alisdair, so I'll lob this one at you as well. What capabilities are there for energy benchmarking solutions? How can applications assist with year of construction, space type, et cetera, in evaluating the energy benchmarks?
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's sort of one of these things is energy management is a big data. That term gets thrown around a lot. I don't like using it too often, but it is a big data problem. Even just all your energy consuming data, if you take in sort of Kevin's experience with Cox, like the pure amount of data you get just associated with energy consumption. But what impacts your energy consumption is even larger in terms of data sets, in terms of age of facilities, what sort of building fabric you have, even down to what color the roof is on some of your facilities. So by being able to take all of that information into a platform and store it there, it allows you, once you have your energy data, to start slicing, dicing, normalizing, and really get a true picture for what your facilities and portfolio look like. And a data point with no supporting information isn't as useful as one that really gives you the context. So we see that is why being able to store and group your facilities, so for example with NetApp being an example, being able to only view your data centers or your offices or your labs gets you closer to the source of where the real problems are. And in terms of benchmarking, they really allow you to do lots of internal benchmarking, but another area we're seeing a lot of work on, again, NetApp mentioned around Energy Star, is using applications like Energy Star and the data they have to start benchmarking your facilities outside of your own organization. Again, this just makes the sort of data sets you have available even richer, particularly for smaller organizations where they might not be able to benchmark a site across 1,000 internal properties. They can definitely do that across North America with some of the external benchmarking data and capabilities of applications out in the market. Okay, good. Thank you for that, Alisdair. And then Jason, a question that's been posed to you. How can I get minute-by-minute data on my equipment so facilities managers can make decisions in real time?
Yeah, this is kind of an exciting new development, I would say. It kind of combines with the Internet of Things concepts, as well as something that I kind of refer to as the last wire of the smart grid. You know, so let's get right down to the asset and understand it thoroughly with minute-by-minute data. That is something that we're having a lot of success with and experience with, but there are others that can provide that data. You know, it does mean that there needs to be some installation of hardware to supply that data, but in many cases it's proving out that doing so is valuable. And I foresee that, you know, only continuing as we go into the future.
Okay. That does sound exciting. Kevin, question for you. What do you use for energy consumption and cost forecasting in terms of a model?
Well, in most cases, we start out with historical data, but with that, we need to understand the market, understand the regional economics, to looking at, because our diverse location of different businesses, we have to understand what utilities are serving those markets and look at the PSC filing. They have forecasting data, how the energy is being met by the utilities. So we look at economics data, we look at energy forecast by the utilities, by gas companies, and we look at how we use in terms of forward-looking if our load will change or not to help us tweak our forecasting.
Okay, good. Thank you, Kevin. And then, Brian, there's a couple questions that may go hand in hand that I'll direct to you from one of our participants. In your opinion, what is driving executives to finally take sustainability seriously?
That's a simple answer. No, I mean, I think it's a combination of different things. Certainly in our case, and other companies and organizations may be different, but it's a combination of sort of external pressure, primarily from investors. For example, we have investors based in Europe, and there's a lot more concern about things such as, energy used in data centers and the energy used in their products, et cetera. And they want to know more about that. And then we also have customers who are requesting that they want to buy from what they would consider a sustainable or reputable company. So they ask questions of us in that sense. And so when you're sort of the executives customers in that sense are those external parties, they start to realize that this is something that's not just a flash in the pan, and they've seen, certainly for us, majority of our larger customers as part of the sort of even the bidding process, even for an RFP and qualification, we've got to add and share a lot of this different sustainability information with these potential customers. So they realize that it's part of doing business. And then, for us, talking about Energy Star, there's also market opportunities. So there are Energy Star ratings for products, and there's new Energy Star rating for data storage. And we are the largest data storage provider to the U.S. public sector, and so meeting those energy efficiency requirements in data storage is pretty crucial for us in order to continue to have that position in the market, if you will. So customers, investors, and then I guess the last small bit is employees are also very interested. They want to make sure, and especially in the tech industry and in Silicon Valley, there's a big demand for talent, and as part of that is what you're doing. What are you doing to manage your greenhouse gas impacts? What are you doing with water? Those kind of things are important to the new generation of college grads we want to hire into the company.
Okay, great. And perhaps somewhat related to this topic, Brian, can you talk more about how utility data is used for corporate sustainability reporting?
Yeah, so for us, utility data is, let me say, for me, it's a way of linking issues that could be considered as somewhat intangible or not having real value, such as climate change or renewable energy, et cetera, linking it to cost. And while we're not a major manufacturer or a aluminum smelter where we have tons of electricity, it's still a significant annual expenditure for us. And so the opportunity to link that cost to also having an additional benefit, it adds some value to the process of identifying, okay, well, is this something we need to address more comprehensively? And in addition, when you look at something how we queue up investments internally in our internal hurdle rate and ROI calculations that we have, the sustainability aspect of it, you look purely at what we're going to get from utility and utility data, we can talk about the cost aspects of a project and what value it has, and that helps selling the sort of sustainability aspects of the project, which would be a renewable energy product or some other thing we could do to save energy or long term. So it's pretty important to have that good data so that you can clearly talk about and measure and monitor, on certainly a project basis, what's going to happen when you implement something.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. And then, Alisdair, I think this question is getting at some of the drivers that you talked about early in your presentation, but the question asks, in the old days, only accounting cared about utility bill data. Why is the demand for data increasing across all organizational functions? What are the drivers?
Yeah, so a good question, and I think the fact that the person mentioned there that in the past it was only accounting that cared because of avoided late fees. I think that really just profiles how people used to think about energy in terms of it was only an expense, and not many people even looked into how big an expense it was. It was one of those annoying fixed expenses that, we have to use energy consumption, so unfortunately we have an energy bill. However, all late fees, they could be avoided, so maybe we should look into those. Well, people have actually come around to the idea that energy consumption can actually be avoided, rather than just looking at late fees. I mean, that's a minor component and should just be best practice that you try and avoid those, part of just not being being an efficient business. But that's the real factor we've seen that's driving energy. A lot more people looking into energy management is when it comes to an optimization procedure and understanding that this is something that can be managed. And the responsibility is moving down into a number of groups. And I think a lot of people on today's webinar have already mentioned it, both in the panel and probably in questions coming through. But for example, when it comes to CSR, CSR is not a term we use here much at Verdantix. It's heavily tied with philanthropy, etc. We prefer the term sustainability, and I think Brian's point around what gets executives engaged, money. There should be no shame and no shying away from that. It's what goes round. And we're seeing optimization is what's driving everything in energy management. So facilities teams looking at streamlining not only their actual members of staff, but also how energy is consumed within the assets. Procurement teams optimizing their strategies to ensure that they're buying energy at the best possible rate. And it's really that data piece. Again, I think if you look at other inflows into a business, people, if you could look around your office and you saw 20% of your staff doing nothing all day, you'd be quick to get rid of those 20% of staff or put them to work elsewhere. If you're in a manufacturing plant and you see lots of waste piling up, you'd be quick to look at your processes and try and reduce that waste. Energy suffered with a problem of nobody could see it beforehand. However, with the data and the solutions now in the market, energy is becoming visible just like your employees and just like your waste. And people are looking for all opportunities to try and optimize that and reduce it as much as possible.
Okay, thank you, Alisdair. And then this question was directed at Urjanet, and the question is, in terms of users of our data, have we seen a shift in the titles of those that are actually consuming our energy data? And I would say yes, definitely in two areas. One is we're seeing, as has been often discussed in our session today, the much broader use of energy data throughout the organization. And also we're seeing folks at more senior levels in the organization being interested in energy data. And so definitely we're seeing shifts in those two areas. And then as a related question, and that is, how do our clients use energy data for the whole enterprise? We actually think about 4 different personas, users within the commercial organizations that are looking at our data. One is in accounting, where they really want to build an efficient accounting operation and reduce late fees and service disruptions. Also in the area of energy procurement, where they're obviously looking for ways to be more cost effective when they actually buy energy. And then energy management and facilities, where they're looking for ways to be more efficient in their use of energy. And then finally, sustainability, where they're trying to track how they're doing against various goals they have in place around greenhouse gas emissions and carbon footprint and other such things. So big area of interest, at least in our customers. And I think we may have time for just a couple more here. Kevin, for you, are there ways that allow different departments to obtain various metrics that they seek, all while having one central and standardized input process instead of multiple staff inputting data on different platforms?
Well, that's actually something we've been trying to do all along, is that to have a centralized location where other folks, other departments, other companies can have access to see what's happening in terms of the energy data. And the hardest part is the fact that, there's a lot of location, a lot of data source owners that like to do their own entry, and it's difficult. But one way of dealing with different folks entering data is that you need to have a strict governance process to do that. Make sure that that are there in place, the process are in place to make sure that the way people are entering data is as accurate as possible.
Okay, that's good. And then Alisdair, for you, how are manufacturing companies reducing energy spend at the building level?
Yeah, and that's a good question in terms of many would assume industrial firms are actually the leading firms in terms of energy management because of the sort of intensity in some of their operations. However, our research has found that that's actually not the case. Industrial firms have tended to spend a lot of time focused on individual processes. That's very much how their mindset works and how the company's organized internally, and not so much time around thinking about the entire system or the facility, so the more so building level. And again, we're seeing that the software and the data that's out there now is about providing visibility in terms of how much the building is using in terms of energy consumption, and allowing them to shift their focus away from the processes that we've been optimizing for the past 20 to 25 years to some of the peripheral bits that they maybe didn't really realize were consuming so much energy. So it's allowing them to narrow down in that sort of way. But also, an interesting one is if you look at the difference between manufacturing and, say, data centers. So the DSIM industry is one where you're looking at management of data centers, and that's a very holistic view, looking at the aspects within, but then also how they interact with the buildings. And that's where we're seeing manufacturing companies move to, is look at the internal operations, but then also how those interact with the building as a whole. And another really important thing for industrial firms, and we're seeing a lot of more interest in, is looking at the supply side. So not just how much energy am I using, but when am I using it, and is there anything I can do to my internal operations to shift some load or potentially run things at different times, which might help me alter my load profile and ultimately try and reduce those energy costs that are coming in each month, which can be very significant.
Okay, thank you for that, Alisdair. And then I think we have time for perhaps one more question. Jason, you may be the best to answer this. We've seen some companies using submetering. What kind of alternatives are there?
Good question. I think the good news is that there are a lot of alternatives on the market now, from that can take you from a building level all the way down to the equipment level. They're all roughly the same type of technology. I think the key is understanding what you're trying to get out of the data, and then deciding whether the economics kind of make sense for you. At a large scale, submetering can still be somewhat expensive if you go with certain architectures. But it may be worth it depending on what you're going to be able to get out of the data. So, I'd say definitely consider incorporating submetering into your operational plans, into your energy management plans, and consider how you're going to use that data carefully before you go ahead with that kind of investment.
Okay, good. That's great. So that's really all the time we have today. Once again, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their insights into the world of energy data. As a follow-on to the session today, we'll be sending each of you links to download a few resources, along with a copy of the slides and recording of this webinar. And again, be on the lookout for our expert Q&A next week as well. So thanks again for tuning in, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon.